Okay, hello and welcome to Higher Education, the podcast that explores career development in public education. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Sergo, and in each episode, we explore different aspects of career development, interview experts, and share practical advice. Today, we're going to be exploring the power of maintaining motivation at work and building stronger, more engaged teams. Thank you for joining us for our March episode of Higher Education. I think this month's topic is going to be extremely helpful to many of our listeners. Many of us are in this sort of slow climb towards spring break when stamina and motivation can sometimes be waning. So whether you're a teacher that's shaping young minds, an administrator supporting teams, a support professional, or even a leader, staying motivated is vital to your success and your well-being. And to walk us through this topic today, I've invited two guests to the show today. We have Jen Bingman and Megan Stein, who are here to share with us their experience and their perspective on how we can do this well for ourselves and for one another. And before we dive into today's topic, I want to ask each of our guests to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their fast facts as they unlock those for us, and why this topic is of interest to them, and what they're hoping we'll talk about today. So I'm going to start with you, Megan. Can you introduce yourself to our audience, a little bit about yourself and why this topic is so important to you?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. I currently am an elementary school principal in Frederick County. It's my 13th year serving as a school-based administrator, but for the past 5, I've really leaned into programs as a coach and a mentor, both in our system and our state. So I'm thrilled to be here today to dive into the topic of motivation at work and how we can level up through building trusting teams and celebrating collective success.
Thank you, Megan. We're so excited to have you here and looking forward to hearing more about your experience and what you can share with our audience. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer Bingman. Jennifer, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit with our audience about your fast facts and why this topic is so interesting for you?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So, as you said, I'm Jennifer Bingman, and I'm the Associate Superintendent for Special Education and Student Services. I've had the good fortune of working in FCPS for 30 years. And over the time that I've been here, I feel like I've been a leader for all 30, because whether I was a teacher, an assistant principal, supervisor, director, or now as associate superintendent, you're always a leader. And so it's important for folks to understand, no matter what your role, you're a leader in our school system. And that's why this is such an important topic to me, is because we all have to understand that we have a part in our positive environment that we create. And so it's critically important to help staff stay motivated and be more engaged. Essentially, I've had the good fortune of uniting 2 departments together as to one. And what we had to do was really spend the work to come together, to be a family, and to really unite to create a positive culture. And I'm so excited about this topic because there is a lot of noise, both inside and outside of our work environment at this time. And it can be really hard to quiet the noise and to really help ourselves to focus. But when we do that, we're able to really be positive and really be able to shift our attention away from the noise and stay positive and really help others be motivated. And so that we can really change our own mindset and be in control of our own mindset and our actions so that we can be proactive and confident as we address our challenges rather than feeling overwhelmed, because sometimes it can create us to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, I appreciate one of the reasons I wanted both of you to join today is because my interactions with you always suggest to me that you prioritize this idea of motivating and organizing people. And I want to start our first segment to really talking about how you motivate yourselves, right? So, motivation is basically energy and stamina coming together. And I think a lot of times when people see both of you, they may make assumptions that your energy is endless, that your positivity is endless, that your stamina has no ends. And the reality is that you also have to engage in daily habits and practice to stay motivated as a leader, to model that for others and do that for others. But you first have to do it for yourselves. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do. What are the key habits that you've developed to stay energized and motivated to maintain balance in such demanding roles? So Jen, let's start with you this time. Can you share a little bit about what you do to make that happen for yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. And my whole goal is to stay focused on my why. I think it's really critically important for you to stay motivated, to really understand, why do you do this work? What is your goal? And when you're grounded in what your goal is and your why, then it makes it easier for you to do the work. And so for me, I start each day by centering myself. My goal for the day is to make a difference. I know that in everything I do and in every person I touch, my goal is that I make a difference. And sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier. There's absolutely no doubt that there are hard days, but through it all, my goal is still remains the same, to make a difference. And so I start my day by really refreshing myself in my goal and then making sure that I cleared my plate from the day before, because that helps get rid of the cloudiness that can happen from the previous day so that I'm starting with a fresh plate as I attack my day for the day. For me as a person, my family is critically important. I have the good fortune of having 4 children, and my husband and my extended family are very important. So I really try to stay connected to them because they help fill my bucket so that I can then stay connected and motivated at work. And so making sure that I keep that balance is really critically important for myself as I continue to stay focused on my why. And so when I say to people, I was speaking to a school and they asked me, how do you always stay so positive? And I actually said to them, we all have choices about our positivity. We all have that 10% that are the hard stuff or the difficult things that we face each day. And we make a choice as to how we allow that to overtake our day or make it to be a small part of it. And so I really focus on compartmentalizing the hard stuff so that then I can be present and be part of everything else that happens in the day. As again, I really try to make sure that I make a difference and understand my why.
Yeah, and I love what you talked about is sort of how you set that intention for the day. A lot of people know the first thing I do every morning is, I tweet out something into the world. It's sort of been doing that for a long time. And it's funny, I do it more for myself than for others because it's sort of, I start my day by being grounded in sort of the opportunity in front of us. And I love how you describe that idea of positivity is a choice, right? And so it's not about toxic positivity, which is, I think, an inverse concept where all of the circumstances around you say you should have alarm bells going off and you're just going to pretend everything's great. It's about a choice and how you approach the challenges you face. And so I appreciate how you've described that. Megan, this concept of maintaining motivation is in some ways this antidote to burnout. And we know burnout is a big challenge in leadership roles. What do you do for yourself similarly to build? What are your key habits that helps you not only to take care of yourself, but set that example for others about how to stay motivated?
Absolutely. Burnout is a real challenge, especially in leadership and high responsibility roles, and all of us in education. I couldn't agree with Dr. Bingman more that setting our why and my authentic purpose in serving the students and staff in our system and reminding myself of that importance every morning helps set the tone. I also think I need to model healthy boundaries because if my team doesn't observe me setting that model, then they won't feel like they can either. So, two key things I really try to prioritize is one, not just encourage work life balance, but I have those open conversations. We talk about workload, about well being. It's not just about saying take care of yourself, but normalizing breaks, flexible work when possible, making sure I'm openly talking about my priorities, my family, and things that I find motivating and encouraging in our work, and that others have the opportunity to talk openly with me about that as well. The other thing I think beyond just talking about the work life balance and modeling is really culture. Nothing replaces a positive school culture. And I think burnout happens when people feel isolated, isolated in their work and isolated in their struggles. And so it's really important to focus on building a team where people feel safe and encouraged, but also that they can ask for help when needed and talk openly about their struggles. And so it's important to check in regularly on people beyond just tasks and our day-to-day operations, but really how they're doing. And I think that that makes a difference in not just reducing workload, but helping create an environment that supports balance. And people feel valued and supported and empowered without feeling like they have to sacrifice themselves in the process.
Yeah, I love how you talked about this idea of like modeling and also being accommodating. I think sometimes far too often we have a real sort of propensity to be in a grind culture, that your worth is associated with the amount or the time that you contribute. And so this idea of sort of, recognizing time as a flexible commodity, I mean, within the boundaries of a school day, right? So, but this place, where can you give people time back? Where can you acknowledge what's happening? And that's a great sort of segue into this next topic I'd like to talk about, which is how you can recognize small wins. every school year has an ebb and a flow. And whether you're school-based or you're in central office or in a department that is in a supporting, sort of operational function, we all have these sort of long-term projects. And those can be daunting. I'm sure every person listening to this has either a to-do list, a set of Post-its, or maybe a whiteboard that says of these long-term projects. And so sometimes I think maintaining motivation is hard when there seems to be no end to something you're after, whether it be addressing a challenging student behavior, whether it be school improvement planning, whether it be organizational, strategic plans. There are these long-term projects that require a tremendous amount of stamina because they don't start and stop with any sort of definitive lines. I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on this idea of how do you maintain motivation and momentum on long-term or sort of projects or pursuits that don't have clear starts and stops. Jen, let's start with you this time. What are the things that you do? Your team certainly has sort of the corner market on long-term projects and strategic planning. How do you celebrate small wins with your team and try to keep morale high when you're in pursuit of things that are going to cycle through and continue to be areas of focus?
Yes, because sometimes it can be hard, right? When you have a daunting task ahead of you. One of the things that we try to do is to start our regularly scheduled meetings with people sharing celebrations. And at first, it always kind of starts out a little bit awkward because people are just kind of like looking at each other, but it becomes something that people then begin to think about and they want to share. And it allows everybody who's part of the group to celebrate the small wins because we do have to take time. We make a difference every day in the little things that we do. And so when we take the time to celebrate those, we see how we're going to pull off the larger tasks because we've been able to see how the small wins have happened along the way. And so I always love that because I get to hear from folks. And sometimes I'm hearing about things that I didn't even realize people were even attacking, like the problems that they were solving. And so it also helps me as a leader to stay connected to the work that's happening by hearing the little small wins that are taking place. In addition, I try to give people either a short email or notes, handwritten, that tells them that I recognize the work that's happening because it helps them to see that I notice, but it also helps them to see it's making a difference and I'm going to continue to do it. And so that's a really important way to help people because that personalized connection is always really important. Another way is to really establish regular communication plans that really have ways to highlight the work of others. So like in our department, we actually created what we have lessons from the geese. And if you're not aware of the lessons from the geese, but we can learn a lot about leadership and teamwork from the way geese lead and help each other, because the geese actually work together to achieve goals. They understand the importance of leadership, teamwork, sharing the workload, encouragement, and empathy and understanding. And so during our department meetings, we actually recognize one another for the work that they do that aligns with the lessons from the geese. And so that they self-select and give each other the trophies that we have. And it helps them to just kind of see how the milestones are doing with moving the work along. And so trying to find those ways to give the opportunities is really critically important, because if we don't take the time to pause, then things just keep going and no one really sees, and we don't even take the time to recognize the things that have happened along the way. And then to Megan's point earlier, I think it's important for us to stop in and connect with the people that we work with, understanding that they have a personal life and that things are happening. But when we check in on people and we say, how is the project going? How can I help you? Sometimes just asking people how you can help is enough that helps them to be able to continue the work moving forward. And so it's just really taking a pause, taking the time, and making sure that we have the opportunities available for people to recognize the small wins and to celebrate the small wins.
It reminds me, when we talked last month's podcast about recognition and appreciation, among those are things like handwritten notes. And I think, far too often we forget to do some of the most simple things. I was teaching a class, I teach on the weekends, and someone was sharing with me that they had written a note to a leader. I don't remember what the person's role. And they said that the leader was so moved by receiving this note that it surprised them. And I said, well, leaders don't get a lot of notes. And so, it's also this idea of the power of the written word, the power of being able to just acknowledge it doesn't, and even if it's like a text or an email to say like, I see you, I recognize your effort, I think is really important, not just at the end point, but along the way. Megan, what about from your perspective, in your school or in your school-based perspective, how do you ensure staff and you stay motivated? How do you recognize progress?
Absolutely. I mean, motivation is sustained when employees feel valued. And to your point, Dr. Sergo, sometimes I have to pause and think, what matters to me? And when do I feel valued, especially in education when we're in a system of continuous improvement? We go through cycles and we're always working to better the lives of our students. And so I think you can do that through recognizing progress, celebrating those wins, whether big or small. It really reinforces the purpose and it keeps teams engaged in the long-term work. I think motivation isn't just about those big term goals and those big achievements, but what's our small wins that create momentum along the way? And how does acknowledging those wins and the staff that contribute to them really improve our sustained efforts? And I find as a school-based leader, one way that I really do that is having open conversations, either written or in groups or, one-on-one with staff about being you and being authentic to your contribution to our work. Everyone in my school brings their unique background and circumstances and their value. And we need that to move the work forward. And so by, continuously having those conversations and acknowledging what you bring to our collective work, I think really grounds people in their sense of importance, and why we need everyone to celebrate, those efforts. And it creates that collective culture and that growth mindset that while we have a long-term goal here, every day I show up matters. And everything I do for this team, for our students, matters. And so I find having those open conversations and celebrating that on a continuous basis really helps with motivation in the workplace.
One of the things that you both talked about is sort of not only through long-term projects, but the importance of recognizing small wins among hard pursuits. And that sort of takes us to our next segment, which is really sort of how we motivate people when things are hard. And, there's a lot of hard in the work that we do. And when people are struggling, either they're struggling with a challenge that they're facing or they're personally struggling, maybe they're doubting their own capacity to persist. People are questioning their readiness for the work or the task at hand. Leadership plays a critical role in motivating. I would submit that part of that is creating space for people to articulate their hard parts. One of my favorite quotes I shared recently was, even the darkest hour only has 60 minutes. And so it is not to suggest that there isn't anything hard that happens. And we do, as leaders, need to hold space for people to be able to put words to what's hard for them and what's making them feel unmotivated or overwhelmed. I'd like to go back to you, Megan, to start in this part of the conversation. How do you inspire motivation in your staff when the going gets tough?
Absolutely. Motivation can dip when challenges arise. As a leader, I think it's important how we respond in those tough moments, and that sets the tone for the entire team. And two things that I've really found valuable is having one, open communication, and two, leading with optimism, not necessarily positivity. And we talked about that, potentially toxic positivity earlier, but optimism. And so first and foremost, open communication. I think transparency is key. When times are tough, I don't want to shy away from the reality of the situation. Instead, what I want to do is acknowledge what's happening, make sure my team and everyone involved understands the why behind decision making and what's happening and the big picture. And people stay motivated when they feel informed and they're not so much left in the dark. So that's really a key component for challenges. The other thing, as I shared, is leading with optimism. Positivity isn't about ignoring problems, but it's about focusing on solutions and, striving to frame those challenges as opportunities for growth. When my team sees that I remain hopeful and solution focused, it encourages them to do the same. And I often say that, with every change or challenge or disruption, it's an opportunity for us to grow and to look at situations differently and come out on the other side, maybe a little bit better. And so, at the end of the day, I think motivation can thrive in an environment where people feel heard, supported, and we remain in our sense of purpose, even when times get tough. And I found in my experiences, sometimes going through challenges with teams, we come out stronger, more collaborative, more supportive, and with more clarity on our purpose and role.
I love what you talked about when you shared the idea of information. I've always maintained that information is a type of currency in an organization. And your job as a leader is to sort of make it rain and give everybody some money, some of that currency. And there's a lot of research that supports what you've suggested. I was listening to a parenting podcast actually earlier this week, and they talked about one of the things that's important. A lot of times adults make assumptions that kids can't handle certain information when things feel unstable or the world becomes unstable or their circumstances are unstable. It was in the context of talking about the recent California wildfires and people feeling like their homes were in danger, and we're trying to protect their kids from that worry. And the researcher was really talking about that if you don't give people information, they make up worse stories than the truth. And it's important that if you are in a crisis, that a great leader will provide information that creates stability, but not unfulfilled promises and not sort of an elaborative description of something that's uncertain. So I really want to underscore that the research really supports what you're saying about information being important in leading and motivating others in times of crisis. Jen, I'd love to hear your perspective. How do you see it from your perspective as either in central office or just all of your school-based experience? What do you think about how teachers and leaders can maintain motivation in times of crisis?
Really surrounding themselves with people who will help and support them. Really, we are always better together. And so when we come together, we're always going to be better and stronger. And so taking the time to surround yourself with people who are going to help you and help you to see outside of whatever it is that you're dealing with. Because let's face it, every single person in our organization has a struggle every day. It's a reality of what we deal with. But when we surround ourselves with people who help us to be able to see, actually, that's just one small part. Like we can move on, we can keep going, then we're better because of that. And so to me, collaboration is also a critical piece. Collaboration allows us to make sure that what we're doing is best, and it helps us to make it better and stronger. Collective efficacy is the shared belief of the group's ability to really work together to achieve a goal. And really that happens because of collaboration. And what research shows us time and time again, collective efficacy is number one in moving the student achievement and the work along. And so when we collaborate and we really have a shared belief with the people that we're working with, we are going to be able to overcome and we are going to be able to make a difference. And so it really takes taking the time to really determine who are my support system and how can I be a better person who supports my colleagues, right? Because sometimes we have to be introspective to look at ourselves to say, am I helping to be a positive and help to motivate others? Or am I helping to bring down some of the motivation that and the positivity that's happening around me? And so we all have to be able to be that person for other people, but we also have to be willing to look at ourselves because we all contribute. And sometimes we contribute in the best ways, and sometimes we can do a little better. And so that introspection really helps us to really kind of grow that. The other piece is really mentoring. When you take the time to mentor others, it can fill your bucket as a mentor, but when you're also receiving someone who's mentoring you, you're getting the benefit of being able to continue to grow. And so that really helps teachers and leaders to really create that motivated community by developing mentoring programs and making sure that people have that mentor that's going to be there for them and help them to grow and to help them to problem solve. Because again, we're all going to run into problems. And so we have to make sure that we take the time to come together, think it through, and determine what's our best course of action. The other thing that really popped into my mind was about communication, and you all hit on that, certainly, but really taking the time to be honest with people. We give people a benefit whenever we tell them the truth and help them to really be introspective. And so really communicating with folks and helping them to see the power of working together and helping them to be better collaborators and supporters of one another. And I will just say that when I surround myself with people who fill my bucket, then I am more motivated. And then I aim to be a bucket filler for other people. And so really when it comes down to it, like, let's be present for one another and let's really support one another in the work that's happening and help people out whenever things are going in the way that they don't necessarily want to, because we can be that for one another.
It's a great segue to our last segment on peer-to-peer motivation. I want to talk about that in just a moment, but I want to go back to what you talked about regarding Hattie's research on collective teacher efficacy and sort of that correlation. But what's interesting about teacher efficacy, and I had a colleague who did their doctoral study on this in leaders, and one of the things that was really interesting, it's sort of this premise of it is, if you think you can or you can't, you're right. Right. And so this idea of when I was leading a building and I would have a, very normal conversation with someone who was struggling with a student, whether it be getting them to reach academic milestones or behavioral milestones, the teachers who were successful with hard to reach kids were always the ones who knew that they could do it, even if it was hard and they weren't being successful in that moment. And so if you believe you can't, you won't. And if you believe you can, you will. And so I appreciate you elevating that important part of the research on motivation. But I want to go even deeper into this last segment. And you queued it up so beautifully about being a good peer to others. How do you find your people and how do you do this for each other? Peer-to-peer encouragement is what creates a positive work environment. It makes a huge difference. This responsibility isn't just for leaders. And while both of you are obviously leaders in your role, this podcast, these career development materials that we put out are for everyone in the organization, because we fundamentally believe that you can lead from where you are and you can demonstrate these leadership habits in whatever role you're in by being a motivating peer to your colleagues. So Jen, I'd like to go back to you and then come to Megan. Jen, how do you foster a culture of peer-to-peer encouragement so that we can have motivation be at the center of our work environment?
It's really making sure that people have the time and the platform to provide the shout outs, right? Giving them the opportunity to pause and to be able to really come together organized around a task, a topic, whatever it may be, but making sure that they have the time to really develop those relationships and make sure that they understand what they're doing to work together. Because sometimes it's hard. I mean, let's face it, we all have personalities. Sometimes we fit really well, and sometimes we don't necessarily fit as well. But we all have to work together and see that we can come together in order to make a difference. And so really giving them the opportunity to get to know one another, and then as well to really be focused on what it is that they're working on so that they can create that culture of encouragement among themselves. Because again, it's not going to happen from who you consider to be the leader, right? Like we talked about in the beginning, we are all leaders, whether you're a teacher, an SEIA, whatever, you are a leader in our system and you help to set the culture of encouragement by your actions, by your nonverbal, by your verbal, that all of those things help to set that culture of encouragement. And we all have a responsibility. And so as a leader, make sure that you set up the time for the folks to come together, to give them the opportunity and the platform to have shout outs so that they can really recognize one another for the great things. Because when we take the time to recognize colleagues, it really helps us to have a better sense of belonging. And what we know is that we all really do want to belong. We all want to feel connected. We want to feel connected to one another, connected to the work, and really connected to the purpose. And so therefore, when we have that time, we're able to really create that sense of belonging that really does then enable us to have a positive culture and certainly a culture of encouragement. And so when you're working on projects, be willing to go above and beyond, be willing to check in and make sure that you're available and present for colleagues. Like for me, when I know that someone's doing something hard, I'll try to either send an email, a text, pop in their cube or their school, wherever it may be, to just see, is there something I can do to help? How can I help you? And that's how we can continue to encourage one another, because we just know that we're there for one another. And always give your full attention. When you're working together and you're working on something, make sure that you're really present at the moment, and then know. And if you're given a task, make sure you follow up and do it, because one of the things that can hurt our culture is when people don't actually follow through. So the culture of encouragement actually happens through all the little things that we do each day. And we all have a responsibility in that, and making sure that we are doing what we can to really build that sense of belonging for one another in all that we do.
These are fantastic ideas about ways that we can sort of be a good colleague and a good partner to those that we work with. Thank you for sharing them. Megan, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the practices and systems that you've implemented or that you do to create that peer-to-peer or that staff can do to uplift one another?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with Dr. Bingman more that, as serving the leader in the school, it's understanding that every interaction I have is either building up, building our culture, or breaking it down. And so that starts at the top with modeling that, but making sure that everyone understands we're all leaders. We're all leaders in our work, and having those conversations about what people bring to the role and how they can see the best in each other as well. And there's a lot of research behind diversity, equity, and belonging. Just like Dr. Bingman shared, when people feel that sense of value and that they belong, whether it be students or staff, their ability to, attrition like information and be able to bring their best is so much more heightened. And so I think having those conversations, leading by example, but then also setting the structures in place that show that this matters for us to acknowledge each other in our work. So whether it be in our weekly newsletter, we have an opportunity for staff to recognize each other. For students, I highlight a morning message and we talk about great news that's happening in our school, both from staff recognition and student recognition. And so amplifying that voice and that sense of hope and positive work, but that it doesn't just have to come from the leader in the building or a title. Everybody can do that. And everybody can bring value with recognizing each other. And so I think that's really important to model within our work as well.
I love, one of the things you reminded me of is, so from a system-wide perspective, I had started 2 awards that we now use. One is community members nominating staff, and one is staff nominating staff. And every single time when we send out those notices of selection, we do them every month, the people write back, with such, they're so moved. While the recognition comes from the office of the superintendent, they're moved by the words of the people they work with. So when we write those letters, we put little excerpts of your colleague said this about you, or a family member or a member of your community said this, and they talk about how touched they are. And so I think you're right. There's also it's not to say it means more than the feedback of their supervisor, but it means something more deep and I think different when the people are noticing the small moves that they make. And you're both right. We can do this in lots of ways. We can do them in the traditional ways of shout outs. We can also do them in invisible ways. One of the things we do in the Human Resources Department is we started a Padlet, which has a little QR code that you can scan and add to at any point. And we start every staff meeting by pulling up the Padlet, and people can see little notes that people did, and they can add them even just from their phones right in that moment. So again, it's small moves that are meaningful, and coming from the people who sit alongside you matters so much. That's getting us onto the end of our time today. And I want to make sure, of course, I take an opportunity to thank both Megan Stein and Jen Bingman for their time. We've talked about so many wonderful opportunities to stay motivated, particularly at a time of year where motivation can certainly wane as we look at where we are in the cadence of the school year. But before you go, one question I love to ask our guests as they come is, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's aiming to level up in their chosen field or profession and is listening to this podcast, what would it be? And so, Jen, I'll have you go first and then have Megan share.
Sure. And some of it I already kind of said, but I'm going to kind of use it as my summary. Know and stay true to your why. When you know your why, it helps you to stay motivated because you know why you're doing the work that you are. Be fully present in the moment, because when you're fully present, you're able to really enjoy the process and the work and the people. Practice gratitude, because it certainly comes back tenfold. Anytime that you give people a thank you, it comes back to you. Always find something to laugh about. Laughter is good for the soul, and things are hard. And so when you take a moment to laugh, it helps you to feel better. And know that your positivity is contagious. So you can be that positive force, because don't ever underestimate the impact that you can have on your own life and on someone else's life whenever you're able to make that choice to say, I want to stay motivated. I want to keep doing this work. You have that ability.
Wonderful, wise words, and words I know you live by as someone who gets the opportunity to serve as your colleague. Megan, what about you? What piece of advice would you give to someone aiming to level up in their chosen field or profession?
So I think so often when we think about leveling up, we think of mentors or who we aspire to be, or people who have led in the role before. But my advice is to be you. I find when people are so authentic to who they are, when they understand their genuine purpose, then success tends to take care of itself. So when I'm coaching and mentoring others or supervising, I often ask, tell me about yourself. Tell me what matters to you. What purpose do you find in your role? And so when you think about what you really are passionate about and what's authentic to you, that's when I really feel like people can level up in their field. And so, yes, it's great to have, aspirations and mentors. And Dr. Sergo, I often love your morning messages as well. They kind of ground me in my day. But then it's important for me to think about who I am and how I show up for people and what matters to me. And so if I could get advice to anyone who was looking to level up, it's be you, be the best every day, strive to be the best version of yourself. And that's how success will take care of for you. And you'll find, that value and purpose in your work as well.
That's right. They would say, if you just act as who you are, it's a lot less work than the opposite. So thank you both for your wonderful words of wisdom. This was a really motivating session for me to really think about recommitting myself to some of those habits that sometimes are hard to keep at the forefront of our work when so much is pressing on us to get done and requires our attention. That wraps up today's episode of Higher Education. I hope you found our exploration of motivating each other and staying motivated at work meaningful, and you found a few strategies that you could add to your tool belt. Please don't forget to check out our supporting slide deck of Quick Bites. These are resources and information, videos and handouts and other things that go with this video that can help you go deeper into this topic, should it be something you choose to do. This is our last higher education podcast for the 2024-2025 school year. We will be back in the fall in September with a brand new 6-session series as we continue to invest in ourselves and one another. Until then, don't forget to like and save this podcast and share it with a friend. Thank you.